Envy by Mary Lamb. The language.
Lamb characterises the flowers with words such as fair, sweet and pretty. This enhances the idea that they are a model for the reader. In contrast, the human emotions that Lamb refers to are discontent, fret and envious, showing that people often struggle with negative feelings. The rose is personified as Lamb applies emotions such as discontent and fret to the plant. This is done in order to draw a comparison between the flower and humans. The pretty flower in line 17 is a metaphor that describes the talents and qualities hidden within a person. It's interesting that here Lamb uses the generic word flower rather than naming a particular plant. This reflects the fact that there are as many good and varied qualities to be found as there are species of flower. The specific flowers that the narrator does name have distinct qualities attached to them. Red roses symbolise love and passion, violets signify loyalty and devotion, while lilies stand for purity. In this way, Lamb subtly uses the language of flowers to introduce a number of desirable qualities into the subtext of the poem. The poem makes a pun of the word vain in order to suggest the idea that trying to change oneself is futile, as well as the idea that people can become self-absorbed into making themselves better when there's actually no need. Lamb's language often makes an appeal to the senses. For example, the reader is given the beautiful image of the red rose, as well as the sensation of the rose's scent. Such sensory language gives the poem a tangible feel. Lamb uses alliteration in the phrase care and culture in order to slow the pace, which in turn suggests that self-reflection takes time. Lamb presents a very hopeful tone, saying that all may find their inner worth if only they take a little time to look.
The form.
The poem takes the form of a lesson as the narrator gives the reader food for thought. It comprises of 3 stanzas, each with 6 lines, and a consistent rhyme scheme. These elements give the poem a steady tone that's in keeping with its instructive content.
The structure.
The poem is structured around a logical argument that builds up step by step using the extended metaphor of the rose tree. In the opening 3 lines, the narrator reminds the reader that a rose is not made to bear any other kind of flowers. In the next 3 lines, this argument is developed as the narrator points out that the rose would strive in vain if it did try and change its natural bent. It simply isn't possible for a rose to grow other flowers. Stanza 2 then adds another layer to the logic. Here the narrator says that if a rose were to try and change, they could only conclude that it had never been able to appreciate the different ways in which it's beautiful. The final stanza draws the logic together, saying that envious persons shouldn't attempt the futile task of becoming something they are not. Instead, they should look within and take time to appreciate the qualities they already have. The poem finishes by saying that the talents found within will be rare. This leaves the reader feeling that if they do look at themselves, they will be rewarded with a realisation they are unique and special.
The context.
Mary Lamb and her brother Charles collaborated on many literary works that were written for children, including their noted tales from Shakespeare and poetry for children. Indeed, Envy is the very first poem in the Poetry for Children anthology. Although Envy was written for children, its message is applicable to people of all ages. In the modern world, surrounded by images of airbrushed celebrities and polished social media profiles, it can be easy to lose sight of true inequalities. Both Mary and her brother were friends with famous romantic writers such as William and Dorothy Wordsworth. The use of nature was a dominant characteristic of romantic literature, and Lamb picks up on this trend in Envy through her use of the rose tree as an extended metaphor for human emotions. Mary Lamb struggled with mental illness, and in 1796 she stabbed her own mother to death. There was an inquest and the coroner returned a verdict of lunacy. For the remainder of her life, Lamb was cared for by family members, as well as spending periods of time inside asylums.